Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bible and Archaeology. You're probably not used to seeing me in this position, but I am joined this week by a very special guest, Dr. Dustin Stewart from Columbia University. Dustin, thank you so much for being here.
It's my pleasure to be here. I'm happy to be here.
Well, I'm very excited. Today we're going to be talking about a topic that we haven't talked about yet, surprisingly, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And we're talking to Dustin here because about a year ago, Dustin is my cousin-in-law, if you can use that framework. We were at a family gathering, and Dustin told me about a class he was teaching on the Epic of Gilgamesh. And I was very interested, and I told Jordan about it. And a few months later, we decided to reach out to Dustin and have him come on to talk a little bit about this class and the Epic of Gilgamesh as a piece of literature. And just thank you so much for being here, Dustin.
Yeah. I'm really pleased to join you. Let me give a little bit of context for this class that brought me to the Epic of Gilgamesh. I had read it as an undergraduate myself, but certainly had never taught it. And it's really far from my field of specialized scholarly focus. I'm an 18th century British literature expert. So this is, millennia away from focus. But the cool thing about this class that I teach, which is required for most students here at Columbia, it's a first year great books class, in short, and it ranges pretty far chronologically and pretty far geographically, spatially. And historically, it's been really sort of Homer-centric. This first year course called Literature Humanities that most students who are entering their Columbia degrees have to kind of begin with. Typically, and I think for most of its history, the paradigmatic experience was, having the Iliad dropped in your lap and you have to read it in the first 2 weeks of school and talk about it. One interesting thing about the appearance, I guess reappearance of the Epic of Gilgamesh on the syllabus for that, for this course that I'm teaching now, is that it sort of shifts, not only the time frame, but also gives us a different set of initial readings that has the effect of shaping students' later experience of Homer. So we're starting with, Mesopotamian works, and students are now, at least in the current formulation of the class, they're reading Gilgamesh before they get to the Iliad, before they get to the Odyssey. And it's interesting to see some of the insights that emerge from that different sequence. So Gilgamesh is new to me, relatively new, but I'm interested in noticing what my students are noticing, what they're picking up on, and the way that it kind of reframes this story of Western, broadly defined, literature and philosophy.
That's a really, really interesting point because the Iliad is so central, especially being in like a classical field, and you are, of course, removed from that. The Iliad is put forth as, a basis of literature. So stepping back is a really interesting perspective. Mm-hmm. How do you frame that to your students? How do you present the Epic of Gilgamesh to them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in the iteration of the class that we're working with right now, the only thing they read before Gilgamesh is considerably earlier, but geographically it's pretty close, and that's in Hedwana's the exaltation of Inanna. Mm-hmm. So Inanna reappears as Ishtar in Gilgamesh. So there are some, common threads. There's also a sort of link between the exaltation of Inanna and Gilgamesh, and that both were for a long time teaching texts. Mm-hmm. So the main thing I'm trying to impress upon students, again, in my non-specialist way, early in the semester is the miracle that these things still exist at all. Mm-hmm. And one reason that we still have them, one way to explain their persistence is that they were both studied as school texts, as set texts in educational contexts for a long time, which is why we have the versions of them that we have, even though they're broken and spliced, especially in the case of Gilgamesh. We still have lots of different, shards and pieces because they were studied in that way. So one thing I want to try to do with students in approaching these texts is to give them a sense of the historical scale of the act of studying them, and try to think about what we might read them for, what we might be trying to learn from them.
So what broader themes are you hoping they take away, or do you personally emphasize within the Epic of Gilgamesh? Because when we think of the Iliad, I mean, I've read the Iliad many times. I've translated it in Greek, and you there's themes your professors want you to emphasize. I mean, friendship, glory. What themes are you wanting your students to take away with this older piece of literature?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm interested in the sense that they might have or might not have of access to the interior lives, some of these characters. We get a clear sense of Achilles questioning the sort of system of honor, the kind of economy of glory that he's confronted with in the Iliad. One of the interesting things that students can encounter in this earlier work in Gilgamesh is the range of possibilities for achievement, for accomplishment. We learn that Gilgamesh is kind of amazing, and the sort of demigod, 2/3 divine, 1/3 mortal, 1/3 human. And yet we also learn that in some ways he's kind of a bad king. So that sets up a kind of political angle into the text, where the appearance of his friend / rival / maybe something else, Enkidu, becomes not only about his sort of the intensity of their sort of friendship, but there's also a political edge to it, because Enkidu seems to be, it's sort of oblique, but Enkidu seems to be the answer to a prayer on the part of Gilgamesh's people, who are, sort of complaining about their plight under this king. So one of the sets of questions that my students are asking is, is Enkidu meant to be like a punishment for Gilgamesh? Is he meant to be a corrective? Another answer to that question that I've drawn from the scholar David Damrosch in particular is the sense that Enkidu is meant as a kind of advisor, a kind of confidant, or sort of aid to Gilgamesh in his role, as king, as leader. So one of the interesting things of the story, one of the interesting aspects of the story, is the way that this other figure, this friend who starts off as a kind of rival but becomes this intense confidant, is meant to provide advice for Gilgamesh, and does that, but the advice doesn't always turn out to be good advice. So the relationship between them, what they're pursuing, what they want for themselves and individually and together, but then also the way that the role of the advisor works, especially when the advice turns out to be bad.
Yeah.
Those are some of the themes that I'm really trying to press, that I think carry forward.
Yeah, most definitely. I have a question about the Epic of Gilgamesh as not predominantly a flood narrative, but how perhaps biblical perspectives or that are being put forth onto the Epic of Gilgamesh have kind of shaped its reception, and how you, in a way, combat that, if you do in any way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, we in this class we move directly from Gilgamesh to Genesis, and the familiarity of the flood narrative is one sort of straightforward link, between the two texts. And there can be a kind of gotcha way of teaching the flood component in Gilgamesh in relation to Genesis. Oh, it turns out that there was a flood narrative that probably predated, maybe influenced the writers of Genesis. My approach is to try to get students to think about continuities, but also differences. One difference, for example, that I wouldn't have been sensitive to before reading, Gilgamesh and teaching it, is the way that the sense that it matters that the flood story in Gilgamesh is told by a character. It's not really told by the narrator. And so this character, Napishti, is relaying this story. And it's the result of, it comes at the very end, it's the result of Gilgamesh's quest for immortality. He initially seeks a kind of glory with Enkidu that results in a series of bad moves that anger various people. And it seems like, again, it's sort of oblique, but it seems like the result of a curse that brings about Enkidu's death. Mm-hmm. And this is sort of wrenching. This is the real pivot point in the Epic of Gilgamesh, this death of Enkidu, and the recognition on Gilgamesh's part that, I'm going to die too. I'm sufficiently mortal and I'm sufficiently like you that this is going to be my end as well. So from the pursuit of glory to the pursuit of immortality, that shift is what leads, Gilgamesh to sort of the ends of the earth, really, to seek out this secret, the secret of immortal life. He thinks I guess it's sort of Indiana Jones like, and there are a lot of sort of paths, a lot of traps that await him on the travel there, scorpion people, and that's
it is kind of Indiana Jones-esque.
Yeah, I guess they're men made of stone too. Anyway, once he gets there, Napishti tells him this story about the flood and his own survival. He, from a biblical perspective, Napishti is the Noah character who survived, but in a way that's sort of different, right? Napishti and his wife continue to live, but they live separate from the rest of humanity. So maybe the gain was that they continue to survive. They're not destroyed by the flood, but there's also a world that's apart from the world of history, of interaction with other people. They're kind of isolated in this almost kind of mythic realm. And that's not really an option that seems, available or good to Gilgamesh. So then the further opportunity for immortality comes through this, this weird plant that Gilgamesh loses his handle on it. A snake comes in and gets it. So where I'm going with all that is the sense that the flood narrative is kind of like deep context for a particular character. And the purpose of that character is to kind of get Gilgamesh to think through what kind of immortality he might have and what kind of immortality he might actually want. Rather than the way that it's framed, I think, somewhat differently, in the Genesis text. So there's certainly continuities, but I guess I also want students to register the differences in terms of narrative function.
Well, the differences are so important, especially in that emphasis on narrative function versus like a foundational myth versus, this heroic journey. So going back a little bit to what you said when we look at the Iliad, how, when your students get to this Homeric poetry, do they manifest these themes into their understanding of the Iliad in texts like that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess another through line is the the relationship between human and divine. Mm-hmm. My students are understandably, preoccupied with the question of free will as opposed to kind of divine involvement.
Always.
In their lives. And in the syllabus, as we, are working through it, we have to confront how this question takes on different proportions and different meaning when we're thinking in a polytheistic framework as opposed to a monotheistic framework. Again, this is just, taken over from David Damrosch's advice about teaching Gilgamesh. The flood as representing a sort of problem or a potential break in the human-divine relationship looks different when there's one God as opposed to multiple gods. Mm-hmm. It in fact becomes sort of more of a problem in the Genesis context. In Gilgamesh, by contrast, we can have one God who sort of seems to be responsible for setting up the flood. Enlil, I think, is his name, and then other gods who decide that he did a bad thing. and they fault him for doing this and for missing the sense that they rely on human beings. In Genesis, the complication comes in, and that the same God who sends the flood is also the God who, I don't know if repents is the right word, but some kind of regret.
Yeah, regret, repent, something like that. He regrets making humans, and then we get the flood.
Right, and then promises not to do it again.
Yeah.
So that sense, one way that students kind of trace this trajectory is to think about human divine interactions in the Iliad, in the wartime context. And one challenge that confronts all of us is that Homer's answers aren't really simple either.
Yeah.
Gods are more powerful, but they can be wounded. We learn. It's they also have skin in the game of the war, because they have actual offspring who are involved in the fighting. And then the gods themselves are sort of lining up against each other, sometimes changing sides. So no simple answers about either divine involvement or human free will emerge in a kind of clean, easy way, because it's sort of more like a sort of spectrum. Students find that both, I think, exciting and also kind of frustrating.
I can understand.
Yeah. So the intense friendship, between Achilles and Patroclus becomes one way of connecting, of linking things back to Gilgamesh, and the sense that Achilles' questioning of whether the gains, the spoils of war are worth his life, and his ongoing questioning about whether maybe a long life with less glory would be preferable to a life cut short, with lots of glory.
Yeah.
That more hypothetical kind of theoretical question gets a wrench gets thrown in it. It gets complicated by the death of Patroclus. So that sense that in some ways friendship or deep personal connection can trump the larger, more speculative question about what kind of life I want to lead. That comes through pretty powerfully in the Iliad.
And would you say it equally comes through as powerfully in the Epic of Gilgamesh?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was struck that this time through in teaching Gilgamesh by what seems like a failed effort at mourning, at grieving Enkidu on Gilgamesh's part. So Enkidu dies. Gilgamesh goes to great lengths to create sort of monuments for him, to make a big to-do, I guess we would say, of his death. This also includes seeming to try to make amends with some of the gods who might have been offended along the way. I'm interested in his attempt, maybe not to walk back, but at least to compensate for earlier failures or earlier missteps, maybe in the act of grieving Enkidu. And yet it's not sufficient, right? Even this sort of lavish act of memorializing his now fallen friend doesn't seem to make him feel satisfied. And that's where the spatial relationship comes in. That's where maybe we get an Odyssey element in Gilgamesh that's not present exactly in the Iliad, namely that Gilgamesh, his mourning, can't be complete if he just stays in Uruk, in his city. So instead, he goes on this, kind of fantastical, almost mythical, journey to seek immortality. the thing that I find maybe most moving about Gilgamesh is when he fails to find immortality in that way, talking to Napishti, the guy who tells the flood story. When he fails in that effort and finds himself coming back to the city, and then he's able to kind of show the boatman, his kind of guide, here's the city, here are its walls. We get a couple of things in that really powerful ending of Gilgamesh. One, he's not going to live forever personally. He's not going to achieve personal immortality. And yet he has the city. It seems like there's a new appreciation in this sort of circle being closed, this new appreciation for the city that he left and that he was sort of, itching to leave and go out to seek glory. It seems like in coming back, he has a new awareness that this is a kind of immortality, living through this place, the city, its walls, its monumentality. But then also the sense that the narrative itself, the epic itself, becomes the thing that carries him forward. So another through line in thinking about ancient literature in a few different geographic sites is, okay, if immortality is off the table, if living forever is off the table,
yeah,
what alternatives are available? What alternatives might satisfy?
That's a really, really important point and huge takeaway. And I want to go back for our last question on something you said at the beginning about what you want your students to take away and the fact that we're still teaching this. How do you emphasize that point, that this text is still important? Because I think a lot of students, I know it's a required first-year seminar, you said, or first-year class, are like, I don't want to read something from 3,000 years ago. I think that in my classes, I encounter students like that all the time. How do you emphasize this text's importance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the translation that we've been using by this guy, Sophus Helle, his introduction begins with the 1872 rediscovery of Gilgamesh. So it was, as your listeners and viewers will know, it was buried for a long time, only rediscovered in the late 19th century. The poet Rilke, exults when he gets to read it in the early 20th century. Gilgamesh is tremendous. And he goes on to say, I find myself concerned in it. That expression is interesting to me because it's not exactly, it's about me. I see myself in it. But somehow it speaks to or resonates with, my own concerns. I think the big challenge, but also the big opportunity of reading older literature. And this is something that, whether old is the 1700s or whether old is,
years and thousands of years ago.
Yeah. Whatever, however far back we want to go, something about navigating the relationship between the unfamiliarity of the past, things were different back then, and the familiarity of the past. Not everything was different back then. That aspect of human experience, or that aspect of human suffering, that sense of being placed in a community, that sense of being in a family, or that sense of struggling to figure out, what love should look like. Those things are common. So I try to split the difference and avoid overstating continuity, familiarity. Oh yeah, they're just like us, right? Well, no. But neither are they totally unrecognizable. Neither are they these alien figures that we can't understand at all. So figuring out what's remained consistent, and maybe what differences have emerged that make it difficult, sometimes inaccessible, to reach these things. That act of seeing what we can still recognize and what we can't understand from the past, and holding the two together at the same time, that to me is really the work of culture. And it's the work, it's the difficulty and also the deep reward of thinking about the human story.
Well, I think that is a really, really great point. And to emphasize the similarities and the differences just makes us even more human if we can understand that through a range of time. And I think that's a great place to leave off. Thank you so much for coming on and talking to us. I'm always happy to talk to you outside of, family functions. But thank you.
It's my pleasure. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation, at the next family gathering.
Well, thank you so much. And for all of us here at Bible Archaeology, I'm Mary Kate Lichty.